continue to negotiate so that we're protecting businesses, workers, and making sure that Canada continues on this great relationship with our neighbor to the south.
Merci. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Well, I think it's been a unifying meeting on behalf of those who've been asked to, of course, to contribute to this effort on behalf of the country. And I think what the Prime Minister and his ministers were able to hear is that all of us who have been asked to participate bring different perspective, but ultimately we care about the greater unity of the country, but equally how we're going to deal with this tariff if it should be implemented. And there's unity of purpose, but equally so, we want to ensure that we continue to work in harmony, again, in the long term, to build that solidarity we have seen here today, but also thank the ministers and the Prime Minister for the incredible work they have done. And we'll continue to, of course, to be ready to help in whatever way we can, given our expertise and our background.
Thank you. Alors, bonjour. Alors, aujourd'hui, ça a été l'occasion d'échanger sur notre lecture à nous de ce qui se passe sur le terrain, les conséquences, les perspectives de négociation pour la relation. Et ça a été, honnêtement, une très bonne discussion. On sent qu'il y a beaucoup d'expertise, mais également de connaissances sur le sujet. Évidemment, le contexte est particulier, hein, parce qu'il faut composer au jour le jour avec ce que M. Trump évoque. Alors, dans la journée d'hier uniquement, dans la première édition du discours, il nous parle d'une démarche pour faire une évaluation des échanges commerciaux. Là-dessus, on ne peut pas être en désaccord. Une lecture commune, un état des lieux, ce serait utile. Et pour le Canada, voilà une belle occasion. Et après ça, en fin de journée, on nous lance le 1er février comme date butoir pour des tarifs de 25 %. Il en ressort un sentiment qu'il y a dans le gouvernement Trump un dilemme. Ils ont un dilemme, un vrai dilemme. Ou ce sera un agenda de croissance économique, ce qu'il a déjà annoncé pour réduire les impôts, déréglementer, réduire la taille de l'État, ou des tarifs. Mais des tarifs, c'est le contraire d'un agenda de croissance économique. C'est exactement le contraire. Des tarifs, c'est une augmentation du coût de la vie, c'est l'inflation, c'est l'augmentation des taux d'intérêt. Alors, ce qu'il faut en décoder aussi, c'est qu'ils ont leurs propres contradictions. Et ce sera à nous de composer avec ça dans la perspective de défendre nos intérêts. So the Americans have their own dilemma. The Trump dilemma is what I saw yesterday. The speech, inaugural speech about a process that makes sense. Canada can disagree with the fact that we should sit down and look at what the trade relationship is. We welcome that. And then later in the day, the 1st of February, and a 25% tariff. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't jive. And I think it speaks to a dilemma of the Trump administration of either pursuing a growth agenda or the tariff agenda. And the tariff agenda is the contrary of economic growth. So there's a lot of work to be done. We're very flattered, all of us, to be part of any work that we can do to support our country.
All right, let's keep it to one question per journalist, une question par journaliste, et puis il y a un second groupe par la suite qui va répondre à des questions. There's also a second group that will answer afterwards. Thank you.
Hi, Sarah Ritchie with the Canadian Press. What are you being paid for your participation on this?
No pay for the participation. We all volunteered to do this. I'm sure there may be some expenses to be covered by the government, but we're volunteering to do this on our own time.
Thank you. Jillian Piper with Global News. Mr. Charest, you're a businessman. I'd like to ask you this question. The Bank of Canada is estimating that if Canada places matching tariffs on the U.S., that the Canadian GDP will go down by 6% and that the loonie will go down by 25%. How devastating do you think this will be for the Canadian economy?
Well, and the more recent study I saw was a 2.6% reduction in GDP if it's a 25% tariff scenario. Also a 1.6 reduction in American U.S. GDP if that were the case. So sum total of all this is that we're all going to suffer. It just doesn't make sense. So let's move to the real question. What is it that the American administration, this administration, wants? What is it that they need? What does Canada have that the Americans need and want, and that where they can't easily find any substitutes? And then we can have a good discussion, and that'll meet our respective interests. All other scenarios, I mean, the Bank of Canada will be meeting on the 29th of January. We'll see what their policy will be. Inflation today came down a bit lower than what they were anticipating at 1.8%. American inflation's at 2.9%. So, you know, there's still a debate in the United States of what they're going to do with their own interest rates, and that we know will be of great interest. Now, interestingly enough, both federal banks, both central banks will be meeting on the same days and delivering decisions on interest rates on January 29th. Stay tuned.
The Prime Minister spoke about supports to help businesses and consumers if Canada does decide to move ahead with tariffs. What kind of support can the government give to businesses to help them sort of stay afloat and deal with some of the impacts of potential tit-for-tat tariffs?
I think we've seen through the pandemic, both the federal government and provinces work very well together to ensure that businesses are going to survive, but also workers were able to stay with their employers because of the challenges that they face with. And I think if we should face the same degree of pain that will come when the tariff is implemented, I think the government needs to be generous as to how it supports business, but equally how it supports workers in the community in which they live in. We're hoping this will be short, but the reality is it's not about the business, but the investment that needs to remain in the country, and the business that needs to remain strong should we come out of this. The workers will have a place to go back to, but equally, how do they feed their family, how do they pay their rent, and more importantly, how are they going to maintain a commitment to their employer. And I think we need to ensure we are balancing all those things. I think some provinces are already thinking ahead, but the federal government needs to be generous in regard to how it's going to respond when that moment comes. Should it happen, how we support the country to keep the country together, but also to keep business and the workers together to make sure they will be there with the skills and the necessary know-it-all to make sure we're going to continue to build a strong economy going forward.
Bonjour, Fanny Olivier de Radio-Canada. Ma question est pour M. Charest. Vous parlez d'une contradiction qu'il y a entre la date du 1er avril et celle du 1er février. Comment est-ce que vous vous expliquez cette contradiction-là, ce dont M. Trump a parlé hier? Est-ce que vous pensez que c'est une tactique de négociation ou c'est juste une incohérence de sa part?
Je n'ai pas d'informations privilégiées sur l'apparente contradiction. Alors, pour être clair avec vous, là, je vous donne mon intuition. Il y a à l'intérieur de l'administration Trump des débats sur l'utilisation des tarifs. Et il y a un dilemme. Clairement, là, les économistes, pas besoin d'être économiste pour comprendre ça, là, il ne peut pas faire à la fois un plan de croissance économique avec la réduction des impôts, des réglementations, réduction des dépenses, et en même temps faire des tarifs. Ça ne marche pas. C'est une contradiction nette. Alors hier, dans la même journée, ma réflexion à moi, l'écoutant, je me suis dit, bon, son discours qui a été préparé par son équipe annonce un exercice pour faire un état des lieux. En passant, c'est plein de bon sens. Avant de bouger, on va au fond des choses, on s'informe, on a une lecture claire de la réalité. Alors, je me suis dit, bravo, le Canada y participera de manière volontaire. Et après ça, en fin de journée, on dit, ben, le 1er mars ou le 1er février, pardon, c'est 25 ben, je me dis, ça ne marche pas. La personne qui a aidé à écrire le discours n'a certainement pas été consultée sur le 1er février. Ça ne se peut pas. Il n'aurait pas dit ça. Alors, il y a un dilemme. La dernière remarque, M. Bessent, qui est son secrétaire à l'économie, équivalent de ministre des Finances, témoignait devant le comité du Sénat la semaine dernière. On lui a posé la question sur les tarifs. Il répond ceci, ça sert à quoi les tarifs? Il dit 3 choses. 1, remettre à niveau les relations économiques entre 2 pays, parce qu'il y en a un qui abuse de la relation. Alors, on fait des tarifs en réponse à un abus de subvention. Deuxièmement, ça sert à ramasser de l'argent. Ce à quoi croit beaucoup M. Trump. Il crée même un ministère du Revenu extérieur. Troisièmement, c'est un outil de négociation. Ça, c'est l'opinion de son ministre des Finances. Alors, il me semble qu'il y a là-dedans un autre reflet de ce qui est le dilemme de M. Trump.
All right, we'll take one last question for this group. Dernière question pour ce groupe, s'il vous plaît.
Hi, Mr. Charest. Tom Perry from CBC. I wonder, I don't know if you've seen any evidence of whether this instability that we're seeing now, if it's having any impact already on Canadian businesses and the investments in Canadian business.
Listen, I think anytime there's a level of uncertainty, capital uncertainty, plain and simple. They want to make sure that where they're investing, not only in our economy, but the American economy. So we've seen some of it. I think you've seen on the ground in terms of individual businesses are making decisions, waiting to see what's coming from the U.S. I think many more of them are optimistic, though. You know, we continue to have this debate as if it's a 25% tariff coming on. We don't know that. We've seen positive signs yesterday from the president when, you know, in his inaugural speech, he barely mentioned the issues here. He did later on in the Oval Office. I think we overreact to that. I think we need to really wait to see what he's going to do. And I think the business community is optimistic that the current government will be there for them, continue to find a way to make sure that if this happens, how do we mitigate it? How do we make sure it's at a short period of time? But listen, there's more to come. You know, we need to know exactly what he's going to do, and I was thrilled today with the group that was there, but I was happy from dealing with cabinet that they've looked at all scenarios. And they will respond. They prepared for 25%, but they've also prepared for other outcomes. And I think Canadians should be reassured that their government is ready to respond and ready to work with the Canadian economy to continue to make sure that we move forward.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the second group shortly. Merci.
First, you want to do like a double mic here? What do you guys want first?
Okay, well, I just want to start by saying we are really happy to be here. This is such an important moment for Canada, and Canada is obviously facing many challenges, and we as a group are really happy to be part of the solution to those challenges. This is such an important moment for Canada, and it's really important that we come together and all Canadians come together to support our future. And we'll just take whatever questions you have for us.
Hi, Arlene. I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on Kevin O'Leary and his advocacy for Canada? I don't know, at Mar-a-Lago. What do you make of him on Fox News and at Mar-a-Lago and mingling with the incoming Trump administration? Do you think it's helpful?
I don't know that it's helpful. I don't believe it is. I mean, Kevin O'Leary isn't authorized to speak on behalf of Canadians, and I frankly don't believe he is speaking on behalf of Canadians with what he's saying. I mean, if he was negotiating on our side, I think that would be, you know, totally fine, but he's not. He's negotiating against us, so I don't think it's a helpful solution right now.
Hi, I'm wondering how businesses are reacting right now. You know, the talk is trying to avoid the 25% tariff across the board, but it seems that tariffs one way or the other is being considered by the U.S. What's the preparation being undertaken right now? Is the expectation that companies need to be prepared for at least, for example, a 10% tariff?
First of all, let me point out in terms of our group, the group is not a political group. Let's just say that. We're here on behalf of all Canadians, regardless of political stripe. And so as a business person, my company, for example, I started a company 22 years ago with one employee. We have 4,400 people in our group today. And my job is to protect the livelihood of those 4,400 people. That is it. That is our responsibility. So as business leaders, that's what our responsibility is. That said, when someone make a threat to your livelihood, you can't take it lightly. We can't sit here and say, let's see what happens and let's respond. But we've seen this movie before. This is the second time we've seen it. And we now are developing, we have a playbook, and we're essentially modifying the playbook, dusting it off, and we're going to enact the things that we need to do to protect our livelihood and protect our economy, and also, most importantly, protect Canadian jobs.
I'm sorry, what does that mean, though? What does that look like?
Well, first of all, there's a lot of great things that we have here in Canada. We have some of the best companies in this country, some of the best. So the impression that people are putting out there is that if this happens, we're going to be crippled. Well, we're not going to be crippled. We're not going to sit here and not do something about it, but we have to recognize the fact that the U.S. does an incredible amount of trade with Canada. We have resources that they absolutely need. and this is the closest place they also can get it from. So there's a lot of levers that we have to defend ourselves and to retaliate, but that's not, the government will do what they need to do. But at the end of the day, we have a lot of opportunities here to make this country better and to galvanize Canadian. So specifically in terms of what we're going to do, well, there's a lot of levers that we can pull, and we're just looking at everything.
Sorry, Sean. I think just to answer to specifically on what are businesses doing across the boardrooms across this country, people are trying to consider exactly what the implications of any range of tariffs might be on their business and how they can counter those in terms of the impact they might have on their business. So I don't know a business that isn't thinking right now about what does this mean? How can I make sure that I'm ready for it? And how can I keep my business safe and secure into the future? And that means thinking about all ranges of tariffs and all types of tariffs. And, the uncertainty is what it is. We don't know what it's going to be, but if you're a good business owner, you're definitely thinking about this.
I'll just add that I think definitely businesses are looking at like supply chain. Where are they currently sourcing goods, and do they have to look for other opportunities? Looking at new partners, other potential new trade partners, and also strategy. So we have some businesses in our organization who were looking to potentially enter into the U.S. market, and they're definitely reconsidering whether that's an option for them moving forward.
Hi, Mike Lecouture with CTV News. You talk about how none of you are political, but this is very clearly a political fight. And you are dealing with an administration, regardless of the playbook that we have, they may not play by the same rules. So I guess my question is, how do you make the business case against tariffs when you consider that this administration is seemingly willing to accept damages against its own economy and ignore all of those rules that all of you play by?
Well, at the end of the day, you're right. We're not fighting the American people or against the American people. This is, as you mentioned, an administration issue. The fact of the matter is that I think ultimately we have Congress, and they're there for a reason. I think we have business leaders in the U.S. that ultimately will be impacted by this in a negative way, and they'll speak up. I don't really think that this is going to be a runaway train. I think ultimately when people start to see the negative impact of the policies, they will stand up and they will start to do something about it. I mean, businesses in the United States.
Guillaume Saint-Pierre, Journal de Montréal. I'm just curious to hear you as business people, what you think about the federal government's response until now. Do you think it's under control as much as they can, or do you feel that we're missing something, any blind spots, anything we could do better?
I feel like the federal government has done an excellent job of putting together the Team Canada people that it has at the table, but also getting everybody galvanized very quickly to, again, what is an uncertain, terms of tariffs that's going to happen for us. But, if we really think about, has the federal government done enough? The federal government is doing everything it can do right now with what it understands to be happening right now, and it is trying to prepare for any inevitability of what that might be. But there is another party at the table that also needs to be galvanized, and that's the Canadian people. We need Canadian businesses and Canadian people to stand up as well. So it's not just about Team Canada and the government, it's about all of us representing our country, standing strong for our country, and making sure that we're doing everything we can to protect the interests of Canadians as best we can. And I think that is really what's at play here.
All right, we'll take one last question. Une dernière question, s'il vous plaît. Merci.
Well, it seems that there's maybe one person missing at the table. It's a big province, Alberta, Danielle Smith. What do you think about how she's been playing the game right now?
I'm an Albertan. I think that it's really important that we all speak together as one voice. In this situation, this isn't about any provincial interests. This is about the interests of us as a nation. And I think it's incredibly important that we absolutely negotiate as one nation together. So, it's what's happening right now. I'm hoping that she will come around and see it that way, because it's in all of our interests if she does.
Thank you very much, everyone. Merci beaucoup.
Sure.
Flavio?
Yeah, I got that, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We good?
Steve, you forced me to stand here. Why don't you ask me a question?
Okay, what do we do?
What do we do? Well, what we don't do is panic. What we do is lean on the lessons that we learned in 1.0, which is there was an executive order yesterday. If you read it, he's instructed his Secretary of Commerce to come back with reports, probably the same as last time, Trade Expansion Act, Section 232. We'll hear soon enough. What we don't do is always react when he has a little bit of a press availability. He says, well, probably, maybe February 1st. He's instructed his government April 1st, and we know the process there. We know what those investigations look like and what statistics they're going to collect. And if it's across the Canadian industry, I think it's incumbent on us to try to mimic that process and figure out what's going to be presented to him. So at the very least, we know the math and science that he has available to him. The art, well, the art is a little bit of a dance, and he's a pretty good dancer, and we'll figure out who amongst us can keep up.
Have you seen any evidence that Canadian businesses are already suffering, that there's a reluctance to invest in Canadian business because of the uncertainty at the moment with the new administration?
What we're seeing in the business sector that I represent is if someone can delay a decision, then they are. If people have invested or started investments, you've seen a lot of investments in this industry committed over the last 24 months, those are still going ahead. There's a lot of things that articulate the value proposition for a company, and it isn't always just the posture of the President of the United States who might want to build a tariff wall. It's what does the market look like, and if that market is still strong in buying those products, I think what the President says becomes part of the portfolio of how they make those decisions. If you haven't started, you probably are likely holding on, and it would be prudent. And I think your investors, especially for publicly traded companies, their shareholders are probably expecting them to, if you've got the time, then use it.
Do you think that's the point? Do you think that's what Trump is trying to do?
I don't know if anybody here knows what Trump is trying to do, but the net effect of what he does is to create uncertainty for allies and adversaries alike, and try to create at least a narrative of certainty for American interests.
I take your point of...
should be lobbying for some kind of carve-out, if these tariffs go ahead, some kind of carve-out for the auto sector, because it's so closely integrated, it's very difficult to apply those tariffs. Should be looking for an exemption in the same way Alberta's looking for an exemption from energy products.
Not at all. I think we're so completely integrated into the U.S. economy. It cuts both ways. Anything you do to the value proposition of making cars in Ontario is going to hurt Michigan. Probably going to hurt Michigan and Ohio and Pennsylvania and Illinois and the automaking states in the U.S. Southeast. So we shouldn't be looking for a carve-out. I think we should let Team Canada balance what cards we play because, that hurt in Michigan. Not that anybody's looking forward to it because Canadian companies are heavily invested in the U.S., 156 parts suppliers, manufacturing facilities in 19 U.S. states, employing 50,000 Americans. If they hurt us, they're going to hurt themselves. I'm not sure that we need to go cap in hand to them now.
I take your point about not overreacting to something that Trump says sort of off the cuff. But we also know that this is part of his style. It's part of how he makes policy. So how do you decide what to react to and what not?
A good guide for us, for me, is he and his team wrote voluminous amounts of executive orders. So I'll read those because those are the actual instructions from the office of the president through the rule of law on what the executive intends to do. And then also, I think if you read very closely, a lot of those have stepped over into congressional authority. So I'm also expecting that the American political and legal system and its government, government officials at all levels are going to ask for that clarity. You can only do that based on what those instructions are. He said a lot of things in the first round. He accused Ted Cruz's father of helping to kill JFK. So we didn't all run and investigate that because that's just who he is. I think we just have to get used to the fact that he's not going to change and he's not going away. And what I saw in Washington yesterday and when I go speak to Americans in the political sphere rather than the industrial sphere, is there's a real movement around that personality. People in all ends of the economic spectrum with their MAGA gear on and really believing some of the core principles that start with America's back and the confidence that comes with that posture. And I think we can't ignore that. Does a Captain Canada emerge? Are there Captain Canadas? In 1995, Jean Charest emerged without being the quarterback to become the one who did that. And I think Doug Ford has played that role in some cases, and I think some of the people that are in this room, Francois Philippe Champagne is another one there. I don't think those Canadians have revealed themselves yet. We're going to go through some really tough times. Let's listen up. Might be Danielle Smith. You know, it really depends. We haven't played those cards yet. We actually don't have anything to respond to yet. It's coming April 1st or maybe February 1st. And until then, I think we just need to be careful and prudent with our cards. We don't play them up.
Flavio, beyond the tariff threat, we do know that Donald Trump is pulling the United States out of the Paris Accord.
Yeah.
We also know that he's pulling back from commitments to EV vehicles. Does that force a rethink of strategy here for the auto industry?
Well, the investments in EVs are made by, ironically, foreign companies here in partnership with two levels of government and with the support of the auto sector, the auto supply sector, and the raw material sector. You know, those are questions I think that need to be answered in Nagoya and in Tokyo and Dearborn and Detroit. Those companies are also watching their prospects of competing with China become a little bit tougher with some of the things that the president has written out yesterday. One of the executive orders says we're going to do away with a $7,500 purchase incentive that Canada fought really hard to become part of. You know, Buy America became Buy North America. He also said he's going to abandon the principles of the IRA, the investment into that space. Those companies are going to have to answer to their shareholders if they don't go where the consumer wants them to go. And in as much as the consumer is going to drive this, and the option is Chinese, and the batteries are Chinese, and all of the stuff, the connected autonomous technology, the AI machine learning that comes from being able to dispatch energy in things like batteries. I think a lot of the response is really going to come from U.S. industrial interests. What do we prefer in Canada? Look, the biggest companies in the automotive space that are Canadian are suppliers. Suppliers just need volume. You're going to make something, make 300,000 of them. And then those are healthy value propositions for the companies and the workers in those companies. The first word has been said on that. I think there's going to be lots more before the last one.
We'll take one last question. Une dernière question. Merci.
Just curious, what do you think about this idea of just slapping high tariffs on Tesla just to make them think twice?
I think that's an itch a lot of people like to scratch because they particularly don't like the leader of that company. But I do think that it's one of those things, like every other move, that we need to balance with what are we going to get out of it. And if that's a card that is worth playing, then maybe people like me shouldn't talk about it.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank
Merci
you.
beaucoup.
Thanks.